The vast emptiness of space was supposed to be quiet, peaceful even. But for the crew of the Orion's Edge, peace was the last thing on their minds. Captain Elias Vance stared at the blinking red warning on his control panel. The ship had detected something massive, just drifting at the edge of their sensor range. The structure was ancient, dark, and lifeless, like a forgotten relic of a war long past. No energy readings, no transmissions, just silence. "Captain, are you seeing this?" Commander Lillian Carter's voice broke the uneasy quiet. She leaned forward, eyes fixed on the flickering holographic display. The unknown object had no registered records in the galactic database. It was completely off the charts. Vance nodded, his grip tightening around the armrest of his chair. "I see it, Carter. But what the hell is it?" The question lingered in the air, unanswered. The rest of the crew exchanged uneasy glances. The Orion's Edge was a deep space exploration vessel, tasked with mapping uncharted regions of the galaxy. They had encountered strange things before: abandoned stations, wrecked ships, even bizarre anomalies. But this was different. There was something wrong about this place. Lieutenant Mark Davis, the ship's weapons officer, scoffed. "Looks dead to me. Probably an old derelict. We should mark the location and move on." But curiosity had always been humanity's greatest strength and its greatest weakness. "Let's get a closer look," Vance ordered. "Scan it for life signs, energy readings, anything." Carter hesitated before nodding. "Aye, Captain." The ship's scanners hummed to life, sweeping over the structure. The results came back almost immediately. "No life signs," Carter confirmed. "No power source detected. But," she frowned, adjusting the data feed, "something's interfering with our scans. The readings are distorted." Davis leaned back. "Could be residual radiation. Or something else," Vance thought. Against his better judgment, he made his decision. "Prepare a drone. I want a visual." A small probe was launched, its tiny frame disappearing into the void as it approached the structure. The ship's crew watched as its live feed appeared on the main screen. At first, there was nothing, just metallic corridors, twisted beams, and shattered glass. Whatever had happened here, it had been violent. Then the probe's camera flickered. The feed distorted. A shrill noise filled the bridge, a high-pitched frequency that sent a wave of static through the ship's comms. And then the message appeared. "You were warned." The screen went black. Silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Then the ship's lights flickered. Systems shut down one by one. The hum of the engines quieted until the only sound was the shallow breathing of the terrified crew. Vance shot to his feet. "Status report now." Carter's hands flew over the controls. "I don't know what happened. Our main systems just." A loud bang echoed through the hull. The crew froze. Another bang. This time, closer. Davis grabbed his sidearm, his face pale. "Tell me that's just debris." No one answered. The ship lurched. Something was inside. Then, for the first time since their arrival, a new reading flashed across the scanners. Not a distress signal, not radiation. A heartbeat. One. Single. Life form. And it was moving. The emergency lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the dimly lit bridge. Captain Vance's pulse pounded in his ears as he struggled to make sense of the impossible reading. The ship's systems were still failing. One by one, screens went dark, alarms blared only to cut off seconds later, and the artificial gravity fluctuated for a brief moment before stabilizing. Whatever had infiltrated Orion's Edge, it wasn't just attacking their ship. It was playing with them. Commander Carter's hands trembled slightly as she worked to regain control of the main systems. "Captain, whatever that thing is, it wasn't there before. I swear it just appeared out of nowhere." Lieutenant Davis tightened his grip on his sidearm, his jaw clenched. "We're being hunted." Vance exhaled sharply. "Security teams, sweep the ship. Find that life form. Now. The comms crackled as the security teams acknowledged the order, their voices tense. The corridors of the Orion's edge were eerily silent as the squads moved in formation, rifles raised. The hum of the emergency lights barely registered over the pounding of their hearts. Deck by deck, they searched. No signs of forced entry. No footprints. No trails. The ship's scanners detected a single entity, but no one could see it. Then, just as quickly as the reading appeared, it vanished. Back on the bridge, Carter's eyes widened. It's gone. Vance turned to her, his expression dark. What do you mean gone? No life signs anymore. Her fingers danced across the controls, desperate to find something, anything. It was on deck for 1 second. And then, nothing. A cold realization settled over the crew. Davis muttered under his breath, "We're not just dealing with some rogue stowaway, are we?" Before anyone could answer, a blood-curdling scream rang out over the ship's comms. Then static. The bridge fell into stunned silence. Vance grabbed the comms unit. "Security, report. What's happening down there?" No response. "Damn it," Davis cursed, already sprinting toward the armory. "We need to move. Now." Vance and Carter followed, their minds racing with questions they didn't want answers to. By the time they reached Deck 4, the first thing they saw was blood. A long crimson streak painted the metal floor, leading into the darkness. No bodies, no weapons, just the lingering, suffocating silence. And then, from the shadows, something breathed. "You said." The silence was thick, suffocating. Captain Vance's heart pounded as he raised his rifle, scanning the darkened corridor ahead. The emergency lights flickered again, casting brief glimpses of the crimson-streaked walls. The air smelled of burning circuits and something else. Something metallic, something wrong. Carter's voice was barely above a whisper. "Where are the bodies?" Davis took a slow step forward, his weapon steady. No drag marks. No signs of a struggle. His throat tightened. "They're just gone." The ship's comms crackled, then a voice, broken, filled with static, cut through the silence. "See, Captain. It's inside. We shot it, but it won't." A wet, gurgling sound. Silence. Then a new noise, a slow, deliberate tapping against the metal walls. Once, twice, then again. A rhythm. A message. Vance gestured for the team to move forward, every step feeling heavier than the last. The corridor twisted ahead, leading toward the security outpost. The automatic door was half open, sparks flying from its jammed mechanisms. Beyond it, the room was dark, the only source of light coming from a single flickering console screen. A faint groan echoed inside. Davis stepped in first, weapon raised. "Show yourself." Nothing. Just the blinking console, displaying an error message in looping text. "You were warned." Then, from the far corner of the room, something moved. A figure slumped against the wall. One of their security officers, his uniform soaked in blood. His chest rose and fell in ragged, uneven breaths. Carter rushed to him, kneeling at his side. "Hold on. We've got you." The officer's eyes fluttered open, wild with terror. His lips moved, forming silent words before his voice finally emerged in a hoarse whisper. "You can't kill it. You can't stop it." His fingers twitched, gripping Carter's wrist weakly. "It's not alone." A deep, guttural, clicking sound echoed from the corridor behind them. Something was there, watching, waiting. Vance's blood ran cold. "Move. Now." Davis was already turning, but then the emergency lights flickered again, plunging them into darkness. In that brief moment, something fast moved through the shadows. A whisper of air, a blur of motion. Then a scream. The lights snapped back on, and Carter gasped. Davis was gone. The air in the corridor felt heavier, like an invisible weight pressing down on them. Captain Vance's pulse roared in his ears as his fingers clenched around his rifle. He scanned the empty space where Davis had been just seconds ago. There was no blood, no body, just the fading echo of his scream. Carter backed up against the wall, breathing hard. Where is he? Her voice trembled as her eyes darted around the dimly lit corridor. The injured security officer on the floor groaned, his fingers twitching weakly. "I told you," he rasped. "It's not alone." A cold chill ran down Vance's spine. Then, from the darkness ahead, a sound. A slow, deliberate click, click, click. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't the sound of damaged wiring or malfunctioning systems. It was something alive. Carter's grip tightened around her weapon. "We need to go. Now." Vance nodded. He grabbed the wounded officer, hauling him to his feet. The man barely had the strength to stand. But they didn't have a choice. Whatever was out there had already taken Davis. They moved fast, sticking close to the wall as they headed toward the nearest service hatch. If they could reach the maintenance shafts, they might be able to bypass the main corridors and get to the armory. They needed better weapons, something with more firepower. But the ship had fallen into an eerie, unnatural silence. The emergency lights flickered at random intervals, casting long, shifting shadows that played tricks on the mind. Every step they took felt like they were being watched, stalked from the unseen corners of the ship. Then came the scraping. Metal against metal, slow and deliberate. The sound of claws, or something worse, dragging against the walls. Vance swallowed hard. His instincts screamed at him to run, but he forced himself to move steadily, keeping his breathing controlled. Panic would get them killed. They reached the hatch. Carter crouched down, working quickly to override the manual lock. It should have taken seconds, but the panel flickered, unresponsive. She gritted her teeth. Damn it. It's locked remotely. Someone, or something, doesn't want us in. Vance turned, pressing his back against the wall as he aimed his rifle toward the corridor. He knew the ship's layout well enough. There was another hatch 2 decks down, but getting there meant moving through more open space. And with whatever was out there, that was a risk. The security officer coughed, his breathing shallow. We have to go." The scraping stopped. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a sharp metallic bang from behind them. Carter spun, eyes wide. It's here. The emergency lights flickered again, and in the split second of darkness, Vance saw it. A shape, tall, thin, unnatural. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. The faint glint of something razor-sharp caught the dim light. Then the lights came back, and it was gone. Vance's breath came fast. He grabbed Carter's arm. "Move." They sprinted down the corridor, their boots pounding against the metal floor. The security officer stumbled, barely able to keep up, but Vance kept pulling him forward. Behind them, the air shifted. A sound, low and unnatural, vibrated through the walls. Not a growl, not a hiss. A laugh. Carter turned mid-run, raising her weapon, but there was nothing behind them. Just empty space. They reached the next hatch. Carter didn't hesitate. She pried open the access panel and began working on the override. Vance turned back, covering her. Then he saw it. Not just one, but 2, standing at the far end of the corridor, just beyond the flickering lights. Unmoving, watching. Their bodies were barely solid, shifting like shadows, as if they weren't entirely in this reality. Carter cursed as she yanked at the panel wires. Come on, come on. The creatures tilted their heads in eerie unison. Then they moved. Not walking, not running. They just shifted. 1 second they were at the end of the corridor. The next, they were halfway down. Vance didn't think. He fired. The first shot passed through them, hitting the bulkhead behind. The second did the same. No effect. No reaction. Then the hatch clicked open. Carter yanked it wide. Go. Vance shoved the wounded officer through first, then Carter dove in after him. just as Vance turned to follow. Cold, sharp fingers clamped around his wrist. Pain shot up his arm as an unnatural force yanked him back. His vision blurred, his pulse spiking as something impossibly strong pulled him toward the darkness. Carter screamed. Vance ripped his arm free, pain searing through his muscles as he stumbled forward and crashed into the maintenance shaft. Carter slammed the hatch shut behind him, sealing it. Vance lay on the cold metal floor, breathing hard. His wrist burned where it had grabbed him. A single dark mark, like an imprint, was seared into his skin. And deep within the corridor outside, the sound of that laugh echoed once more. The silence in the maintenance shaft was suffocating. Vance pressed his back against the cold metal, his breath coming fast and uneven. Carter crouched beside him, gripping her weapon so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The wounded officer slumped against the wall, groaning softly, his breathing shallow. They had made it inside, but at what cost? Vance looked down at his wrist. The mark left by the creature's grip still burned. The skin darkened, as if something had seeped into it. It wasn't just pain. It was something deeper, something wrong. He clenched his jaw and forced himself to ignore it. Carter swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. What the hell was that? Vance didn't answer. He didn't know. And the worst part was, whatever those things were, they weren't just some unknown alien species. They were something else, something that shouldn't exist. The wounded officer let out a weak chuckle, though there was no humor in it. You idiots, you really don't know what you just pissed off, do you? His voice was strained, but there was something in his tone. Resignation, maybe even fear. Carter frowned. What are you talking about? The man looked up, his face pale, sweat dripping down his forehead. This ship was never ours to begin with. The ones who owned it before, they never left. A shiver ran down Vance's spine. That laugh, the way those things moved, the fact that they didn't even seem fully solid. Carter shook her head. That's impossible. There was no life detected when we boarded. The man let out another weak laugh. Because they're not alive. Vance felt his stomach twist. Then what the hell are they? The officer's expression darkened. Predators. They don't hunt for food. They hunt for sport. They enjoy it. They let you think you have a chance, and then... He trailed off, looking down at his bloody uniform. They play with you before they kill you. Carter exhaled slowly, gripping her weapon tighter. Then we don't give them the chance. Vance nodded. We get to the bridge. Send out a distress signal. We get off this ship before it's too late. The officer gave a bitter smile. You really think anyone's coming? You don't get it, do you? His voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. The moment you see them, you're already dead. A sharp clang echoed through the shaft. The air went still. Vance motioned for silence. Carter held her breath. The officer tensed. Another clang, closer this time. Something was moving through the vents. Slow, deliberate. Vance barely blinked as he reached for his knife, knowing full well bullets hadn't stopped them before. The metal around them creaked under an unseen weight. The shadows seemed to stretch, shifting unnaturally. Then came the voice. A whisper, soft as the wind, yet somehow inside their heads. You can run. The shaft went pitch black. A low, mocking laugh filled the air. The darkness swallowed them whole. Vance barely had time to react before something moved in the pitch-black shaft. It wasn't the sound of footsteps. No, it was softer, smoother, like something gliding through the air. His breath caught in his throat. He reached for his knife, but his fingers barely brushed the handle before the whisper returned. You can run, but you can't hide. A sudden burst of static crackled in their comms, followed by a high-pitched, distorted laugh. Carter cursed under her breath, fumbling with her rifle. The wounded officer let out a strangled gasp, his body trembling as he pressed himself against the wall. It's here, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding in Vance's ears. Then came the screech. A horrible, inhuman sound that seemed to vibrate through their bones. The walls of the shaft shuddered, metal groaning under an unseen force. And then, silence. Vance's instincts screamed at him to move, but his body refused to obey. His mind raced. This wasn't just a creature. This was something else. Something worse. Carter took a shaky breath. We need to get out of here. Now. Vance finally snapped into action. He grabbed the officer by the arm and pulled him up, ignoring his weak protests. Carter motioned ahead, and they started crawling through the shaft as quickly as they could. The air was thick, oppressive, as if something unseen was pressing down on them. Then the cold set in. It wasn't normal. It wasn't the kind of cold you felt in space. It was a deep, bone-chilling freeze that clawed at their skin, seeping into their very souls. The officer's breathing grew ragged. His eyes darted wildly. No, 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 no. Then he was gone. 1 second he was there, his fingers digging into Vance's arm. The next, he was being pulled, yanked into the darkness behind them. His scream was cut short, as if something had ripped the air from his lungs. Carter turned, aiming her weapon into the void. Where the hell did he? A hand shot out of the darkness. Vance barely had time to react before it grabbed Carter's wrist. It wasn't like any hand he had ever seen. It was elongated, with claw-like fingers that wrapped around her forearm. Too long, too thin. She screamed, but Vance was already moving, slicing down with his knife. The blade hit nothing. The hand wasn't there anymore. Carter stumbled back, gasping, cradling her arm. The skin where the hand had touched her was already blackening, dark veins spreading from the point of contact. Vance grabbed her by the shoulder. Move. They crawled forward as fast as they could, their bodies aching, their lungs burning. The shaft twisted and turned, but they didn't stop. They couldn't. Behind them, the laughter started again. Slow, taunting. Then came the words. Keep running. It's more fun that way. The emergency exit hatch was just ahead. Vance didn't hesitate. He slammed his fist against the release panel, and the hatch hissed open. They tumbled out onto the grated floor of a maintenance bay, gasping for breath. The door behind them slammed shut. For a moment, they just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what had just happened. Carter broke the silence first, her voice barely above a whisper. Vance, look. He followed her gaze, and his stomach dropped. The hatch wasn't just closed. It was gone, as if it had never existed in the first place. The dim emergency lights flickered overhead as Vance and Carter pushed themselves up from the grated floor. Their bodies ached, lungs burning from the frantic crawl through the maintenance shaft. But the real horror wasn't the chase. It was the fact that the hatch they'd just escaped from had vanished. No seams, no doorframe, just smooth, solid metal where an exit had been seconds ago. Carter's breathing was uneven. This isn't possible. Vance ran his hands over the cold surface, as if he could will the door back into existence. We were just there. It was real. Then where is it now? Vance had no answer. The rational part of his brain screamed for an explanation. Some kind of trick, a malfunction, anything. But deep inside, he already knew the truth. This wasn't just an enemy they were dealing with. This was something beyond logic, beyond understanding. A cold shiver ran down his spine. Carter checked her rifle, her fingers still trembling. We need to move. They turned toward the corridor ahead. The dim red glow of the emergency lighting stretched long shadows across the walls. The ship's usual hum was gone, replaced by an eerie, suffocating silence. Then footsteps. Not theirs. Slow, deliberate, echoing through the empty halls. Vance and Carter froze. The footsteps stopped. Then came the whisper. You're almost there. The voice wasn't coming from behind them. It wasn't coming from ahead either. It was everywhere, surrounding them, inside them. Carter clenched her jaw. Screw this. She lifted her rifle and fired down the hallway. The shots rang out, muzzle flashes lighting up the dark. Sparks flew as bullets tore into the metal walls. Then everything went silent again. Carter lowered her weapon, her breaths coming fast and ragged. "Did I get it?" A soft chuckle answered her. "No." The lights cut out. Vance barely had time to react before something cold brushed against the back of his neck. His body seized up, every muscle locking in place. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't move. Carter screamed. Her flashlight flickered on, just in time to reveal the figure standing inches behind Vance. It wasn't a creature. It wasn't even a shadow. It was something less. A void. A gaping absence of everything. Then it reached for him. A sharp pain exploded through Vance's skull as something forced its way into his mind. Memories shattered. Thoughts unraveled. He saw things that didn't belong to him. Worlds burned, stars snuffed out, civilizations erased like they had never existed. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. Vance collapsed, gasping for air. Carter grabbed his arm, dragging him away. "Come on, Dennett." His vision blurred as he forced himself to his feet. The corridor ahead was shifting, walls stretching, twisting, distorting into impossible shapes. The ship was changing. Carter pulled him forward. "We need to get out of here. Now." They ran. Neither of them knew if they were running towards safety or straight into another trap. But staying still wasn't an option. The corridor stretched endlessly before them, twisting in ways that defied logic. The ship had changed, morphed into something alien, something alive. Vance and Carter ran, their boots slamming against the cold metal floor, the sound swallowed by the unnatural silence pressing in around them. Every door they passed was sealed shut, as if the ship itself was trapping them, forcing them forward. Behind them, the presence followed. It didn't move quickly. It didn't need to. It was patient. It knew they had nowhere to go. Carter's breath was ragged, but she kept moving. How do we fight something like this? Vance's mind raced. The thing had invaded his thoughts, showed him things. He had felt its power. It wasn't just an enemy. It was something old, something that had consumed entire civilizations without leaving a trace. They had provoked it, challenged it, and now it was playing with them. A sudden pain shot through Vance's skull. Visions flashed before his eyes, ships crumbling in the void, planets stripped of life, and endless darkness swallowing entire systems. It wasn't just destruction. It was erasure. It wasn't killing. It was unmaking. His legs faltered. Carter grabbed him, shaking him. "Vance, stay with me." The whisper returned, curling around them like smoke. "You see now, don't you?" Vance clenched his fists. "Why are you doing this?" A low chuckle, distant and near at the same time. "Because you challenged me." The corridor suddenly ended. No doors, no vents, just a smooth wall in front of them. A dead end. Carter spun around, raising her rifle. No, 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 no. The air grew cold. The lights dimmed to nothing. Vance turned slowly, his heart pounding. The shadow stood at the far end of the hall, watching. No eyes, no features, just an absence of everything. It didn't need to move. It was already here. Carter fired. The bullets vanished into the darkness, swallowed whole. No impact, no sound, no effect. Then the whisper again. "You were never meant to be here. You were never meant to exist." The walls trembled. The ship groaned like a living thing. And then, reality itself began to unravel.